Hello and welcome to the Lifting the Iceberg podcast. My name is Tyler James Berger, and on this episode, I talk with Genevieve Kim. Genevieve is a storyteller, photographer, and creative consultant whose work focuses on capturing her subject's essential vital force. Genevieve is all about telling stories and about helping people discover the stories within themselves. We have a great discussion on her background in photography, about how she uses photography as a way to tell stories, and how artists can stay both creative and true to themselves in the modern digital landscape. So, without any further ado, please welcome Genevieve Kim. So I'm sitting here with Genevieve Kim. Genevieve, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Hi, Tyler.
You're such an amazing, creative person, and I've been a fan of you ever since we met. I met you while you were shooting your ICU photography project here at the assemblage, and you have a really interesting style of photography. Maybe it was just specific to that project, but I came in and I didn't really know what to expect. I thought you were just going to be taking like portrait shots or something like that. I just kind of jumped into it, but it was something different. You were like kind of interviewing me and asking me these deep questions about myself, and it felt like you were kind of using your words to extract out certain feelings and then trying to capture the essence of those feelings. So what exactly were you doing, and what are you doing with the ICU project? Like, what is that all about?
Well, I'm really glad that you said that, all of that, because it is basically what this project encompasses. So ICU actually it was inspired by my time photographing for UN Habitats. And just to make a long story short, I realized that multiple vulnerable communities were not being seen. Police or government officials weren't even going or providing any kind of security or support to a lot of these to these neighborhoods. So when I would go to these neighborhoods, they would say, "Thank you so much for visiting us. Thank you for coming and seeing us."
And where exactly was this? Like Beirut?
This one was in Lebanon. So I went to various towns all throughout the country, and then I was also in South Africa, and there's a similar sentiment as well. And many communities are just completely ignored. I mean, this even happens here in the States, right? We'll just marginalize an entire community and consider it riffraff. So the idea of this project was, for me, there's this quote by Ram Dass, and he says, "I can do nothing for you but work on myself." And so that's where this project stemmed from. It was like, okay, wait, instead of me taking this approach that I'm going to save the world and do some sort of activist exemplary work, so to speak, that I really wanted to take a personal approach to what do I need to do to start seeing people. And so I wanted to use the photographic lens that's very intimate, right? Like just being looked at, right? Looking in the eyes with someone across from you. So I wanted to use the intimacy of the photographic lens to see people. And with this project in particular, I decided that this was not going to be a photo shoot. It wasn't, there's no capturing of people. There's no shooting of people. I don't have photo subjects. It's a photo session in which I'm having a conversation and seeing and being seen at the same time, allowing myself to be seen as purely one person sitting across from another I happen to have a camera in my hand, and to hear the other person's story.
What were some of the main questions that you would ask the person you were sitting with? Like, what kind of things were important to you to like pull out of them?
The most important thing, I think, is wondering. My biggest question is, why do people wake up in the morning? And that's not in the literal sense, like, okay, Tyler, why'd you wake up in the morning? it's really like what drives someone to continue to go forward, and what inspires someone to wake up, because I think we have a choice every single second to continue living. We often take that for granted. I think we are like, oh, wait, so why, like, we focus in media a lot of times about like how messed up everything is, versus like, wow, what a triumph that we decided, each of us, you and I are in this room, to live another moment, to live another day. There's a reason why. What is that reason? So I like to ask questions that are around that. And oftentimes that's backed by a story from personal experience that gets someone to that, because I've been in the situation of wanting to kill myself. Like, I had suicidal depression. And so now I'm interested in the idea of living. Why?
And I totally see how something like that can have roots in the places you've been, where there's no kind of government or police attention given to communities, say in Lebanon, where, you know, we're lucky that we don't live in a society quite like that. We live in a very privileged society, but in other places of the world, people need to ask themselves that question more often, like, why am I doing this? Nothing I do seems to have any positive compounding effect on my future, and what will drive someone into life regardless of the adversity that they face. But also, I mean, no matter where you are in the world, you are facing adversity. Everyone faces their own forms of adversity. You just said that you, even living in this privileged society, you had suicidal tendencies. You went through a dark period of your life in the United States of America. You know, that can happen to everyone, and that's something that can be extracted, that those reasons for being, that can be something that can be extracted from anyone's perspective and their life philosophy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I see this as, and part of this project is also a celebration to those who are still here. I mean, it's a celebration to live amidst so much, and so many difficult, like, there's so many options now, to either remain angry, to find a place of compassion, or, you know, to lash out. But it's a choice not to. And so I want to know, for those who aren't in this state of, or who don't choose the route to go towards violence or towards anger and hatred, not that that's wrong to feel those feelings, but like, why not act on those? Why? Like, why choose something else? And that's a mystery to me.
Yeah. And I love the way this whole project that you're doing is focused on the individual. And I think that sometimes we see the forest and not the tree. And I think that it can be easy for someone to just kind of look at a group of people living in a third world country, just like, oh, those people over there, you know. But when you pull one person out of that and point the lens at them and get intimate with their perspective, that can be an incredibly powerful thing. It can be incredibly personalizing thing, and it can make us feel for their pain and their suffering and their joy so much more. Just recognizing them as an individual, not just as a member of some group somewhere, you know? So how do you feel like your photography sessions really get at someone's individuality in a way that another kind of art form might not? Because I think about, like, sometimes people do portrait painting, or what can photography do that painting might not be able to do?
So photography is a very interesting medium, and one of the reasons why I have gravitated so much towards it is that I find photography to be a mixture of all of the arts, where it's both visual, in the traditional sense of a 2D experience, but it's also very much a performative art as well. And what I mean by that is, my background is actually in performing arts. I was an opera singer, and there are moments when, you're in flow and you have a whole orchestra and you have many different people on stage. And I do remember there was one time I actually didn't come on stage at the right time. And someone was like, Genevieve, you need to be out there.
Yeah.
But the music had to keep going, regardless. And I was joking with the conductor afterwards. She's like, where the hell were you? But the thing is, this was for Don Giovanni, and Don Giovanni, he told me, he's like, yeah, no, I just started lip singing, just kind of making things up as you go, and there's no pause. There's no, you can't press rewind, you can't go back, and you can't change a moment. It just keeps going. And that's the same thing in photography. You don't get to have another moment. There's not another exact same smile. There's not another exact same way, and it's very much a live performance where I can't take that moment back.
Yeah.
I can't do it over, but it's also sculptural in that you're this three-dimensional being, right? Or the person who's sitting in front of me is three-dimensional. Not even 5D, but
interesting. So that session we had, that was almost like a unique moment in time.
Exactly.
When you snapped that picture, you caught something that really can never be caught again. Like that individual's essence, not just who they are, maybe in the grander scheme of things, forward and backwards in time, but in that moment, in that specific page of that chapter of that book of their life, you're capturing them, and that's a really cool, powerful thing that I feel like photography can do. Now, I noticed that in all of your pictures for the ICU project, you use black and white. Why?
I can give a very simple answer because I love black and white. But the real reason, black and white fascinates me in that it's a study really of contrast. So we have light and shadow, we have light and dark, and that there's these individual gradations of gray in between. But there are definite elements of contrast that you see in black and white, and that to me is where we're constantly moving in between, right? So it's a beautiful metaphor to me. Not to say that I love color as well, like head to toe, I'm like dressed in multiple colors all the time, but there's something about that, and to direct the eye and to use that language of poetry, so to speak, is really effective in my opinion. Also, there's something on a more design level, is that I can see shapes better, and I think translating shapes, because at the end of the day in art, we can come down to these very simple geometric shapes. For me in particular, triangles. I love triangles. And so to be able to find these geometric shapes and outline them in a more succinct manner.
Triangle flash.
Exactly, triangle flash.
Yeah, that's really cool. When you were saying that, I just had a really interesting thought. In Taoism, the philosophy is that we are all walking the middle way, the way between yin and yang, between light and dark, between chaos and order. And a black and white photograph only deals with those polarities and like how those polarities kind of come together to create one integrated image, which is in a way that's what we are. We are a balanced expression of yin and yang, of light and darkness. And I can totally see how a black and white picture can kind of capture that. That's kind of just blew my mind. But
Oh my
that's
gosh,
cool.
I'm writing that on my
Yeah.
I'm writing that on my website.
Go for it. Go for it. So when did you get into photography as a creative path?
As a creative path, I'd say maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, where I just said, okay, I'm committing to this. But I first started photographing when I was really, really young. Since I was a kid, my dad loved photography, and he had a camera, and he's actually the one who first taught me how to photograph and load a film, a camera. And my sister was also, she's at the time trying to become like a fashion designer. So she was very into photography and styling and all that. And I was her baby model. So I was fascinated with it as a child. And it was often a respite for me, a place to just express things in a way that I wasn't able to do as a drawer. Like I didn't have the capacity with my hands and the dexterity that other people do have as a medium. But it was also a really great way for me growing up to see and remember things. I always wanted to I always loved having photography as a way to remember things and be a reminder. And I still think today that photography is such a unique thing in that it constantly evolves. Mm-hmm. Like a photograph that I make today will carry so much more meaning into the future. Like 20 years from now, Tyler, you and we look at this photograph that I made with you, and you're gonna probably say, oh my God, remember. And that is in and of itself the transformation. It's a living, breathing medium.
Wow. That's a really interesting perspective, because I mean, I've definitely had the experience of taking a picture with some of my friends. I just thought it was like a silly picture, and then I put it on Facebook, and then 10 years later it comes up on my time hop or something, and it's sometimes it's people who I haven't seen in years, people who I haven't hung out with, who were big parts of my childhood that I'm just not in contact with anymore. And I look at that picture so much differently than I did when I just thought it was silly and I put it up on Facebook. So the meaning of a picture evolves.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Exactly.
So then I know that you have a background in opera. How did you started in photography at an early age, but then did that evolve into opera?
I think I never thought of photography as this thing that I wanted to get into or do. I've been a musician since I was a kid. I started piano lessons at 4 and then continued to do that into adulthood, and also did singing lessons. So music was always like the primary mode of expression for me. And then I went to university and studied that. And there came a point, though, in my life where I had a very, I had a fork in the road, where it was, do I continue to be a struggling artist and continue to get rejected from audition after audition, or maybe take, get the role as the chorus member and then do the side hustle of waitressing? Mm-hmm. Or do I go and be some badass, corporate exec or what have you? Like, what is the path? And I at the time, I didn't have the confidence to say, yeah, you know what, this is the path. And also at the same time, I think that life took me down a different road. Mm-hmm. So I said, fuck that. I don't want to be a starving artist.
Yeah.
I told myself that. And I went into business. And I ended up getting my MBA in finance, which is such a total 180.
From opera to finance.
Yeah. There's like a lot in between that too, because I did a lot of like soul searching and hustling, believe me. But then I got my MBA in finance and worked in a management consulting firm and did digital marketing strategy for Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
So it was quite a huge jump, but it was in that time period when I was in my studies where photography was became a solace for me again once I returned to that. And I think there was this long hiatus when I told myself that I wasn't good enough to be a musician, that I wasn't literally able to use my voice anymore. I shut that down in terms of expression, that I turned to something that was a bit quieter, which is photography, so I thought, and turned to that. And then this was also amidst a time when I was very depressed, and I had multiple different caregivers during a very difficult time in my life. And one of them said, well, what do you want to live for? What would you get up for? And I said, photography. I'll go out and snap a few pictures, like whatever. And they said, okay, well, why don't you go do that? So I was like, okay.
It's a good friend.
He was a therapist, he was my doctor and therapist. And so he's like, yeah, just go do that. And I said, okay, all right. So that's all I did for a while. And so photography saved my life in a way, because that was the only thing that got me outside of the house. There was a period when I sequestered myself. That happens a lot with depression, is isolationism, and that was definitely me. But it was also the saving grace, because it would get me to go outside, and I would interact with strangers and talk to people, all forms of life, that were just like, oh, hey, pigeon, let's photograph together.
Yeah.
And it became more so a way of life at that point, because it was the only thing that got me up and out. And it was the way that I would interact with other people and want to just hear their stories. And that evolved into something where I'm like, okay, forget corporate life. Forget what, I told myself, I made this fictitious idea in my head that I didn't want to be a starving artist. Well, I've starved myself of expression. I've starved myself in so many ways of expression and the art, that photography ended up healing me. And I knew that there was no amount of security and a paycheck that could restore that level of just humanity within me to feel something. So I took a leap of faith, and I basically gave my 2 weeks notice and said, okay, well, I have no idea what I'm going to do, except that I need to photograph. This needs to be what I do. I need to tell these stories. And I left my job in 2015. And miraculously, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a prayer, but all I knew in my heart was just, I had to do this. One of the partners at the firm asked me, said, hey, like, what's going on? What? You're leaving? Like, do you have any support? Do you have any backup? What? And I said, no, I don't. And she's like, okay, I'm going to have HR call you, because I think, based on like what you're telling me, I think you should go on leave. Don't quit yet. Just go on leave. And I'm like, yeah, but she's like, so I end up going on paid medical leave, which was so
Wow.
big.
Yeah.
And that was like, holy shit, the guardian angel. Just what? I wasn't even thinking about that. And I didn't even realize what my options were for mental health. To be honest, like I was also, again, I was in a very, very dark, deep state. Also swaying between, client meetings and suicidal depression. It was both, and not being able to vocalize that at all for fear that I would either get kicked off my team, or that, given that I was a woman in management consulting, I thought, okay, well, I can't assume this emotionally unstable, because that's already this, stigma, etc. So I kept quiet, but I wasn't quiet when I left, in terms of just saying, hey, like, this isn't going to work out for me, for my health. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got paid leave. Mm-hmm. Many lessons from that.
And after your paid leave, did you go back to the firm?
I did not. And I knew that, I think, everybody knew, but
Yeah.
it was kind of a saving grace. And it wasn't me who had the idea to, per se, milk the corporate thing. It really wasn't it was literally a partner telling me, hold on.
Well, that's a very good grounded idea, because I know a lot of people, myself included, have been in scenarios where I just feel like dropping everything to pursue my creative passion and to just jump into the abyss, with no strings attached, no safety nets, with the hope and faith that something will work out. And it's funny, usually it does. When you jump, like Terrence McKenna said, sometimes you need to jump into the abyss just to find out that there's a feather bed at the bottom. But it's, I think, important in the society that we live in, if you're going to pursue some kind of creative endeavor, that you don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Because I think we live in a society that it can be difficult to make it as an artist, or to just survive as an artist, like economically. And it's important to have some kind of way of making an income while you're doing your creative thing. Like right now I'm doing this podcast and I don't make any money doing this, but that's okay, because I have a job where I teach parkour and gymnastics, and that's what kind of helps me pay my rent and pay my bills. And I'm able to kind of do this on the side in my free time. I'm hoping this will grow into something more, and that's the idea. But I think that I'm glad that I didn't just jump into podcasting hoping that, okay, that this better work, because I think that can be very straining on your creative process. I'm glad that I can do this podcast and not really have to worry about making money. I feel like it helps me put more attention into getting better at it, and kind of mastering my craft without having that underlying stress of like, I feel like it would fog up my passion for it, So in that time when you had paid leave, you were able to kind of get back into photography and start practicing that passion without having that kind of low chakra, so to speak, concerns to worry about. Now, when you were going out of the house and taking pictures around the city of anything like pigeons, how does photography train your eye to see? Because something that I think is really interesting with different forms of art is I like drawing, just like pencil drawing, and I've noticed that I had a period of time where I really liked drawing plants, and I noticed that as I drew plants, or animals for that matter, I started to notice details more when I saw plants. It's like learning how to draw was training my eye to see details that I hadn't before seen. Like, the art was teaching me how to see more of reality. So how does photography train your eye to see things that you might not otherwise even pay attention to?
I love that you just said that drawing has taught you something, because I feel that photography is my teacher, is my mentor. And I kind of joke that photography, we are now in a different stage of our relationship status has changed. And I would say that it's taught me so much, but since you're asking me about my eye, I think it's taught me a lot about intentionality and what am I focusing on, literally. So I can choose to focus on anything within my frame. But what do I want to make the story about? And I get to choose that. And it's a deliberate, what makes an effective photo, what makes an effective story or poem is what is the subject, or what is the story that I'm trying to tell at the end of the day. And that goes into focusing on the right metaphor, and I don't want to say right, I actually want to say the most effective metaphor for me to do that in whatever language that speaks most to me. I am now, in terms of just what photography has taught me in general, it's taught me a lot about patience, the right moment, timing, and a lot of just interconnection with people. And photography forces me to interact with people, and it forces me to be in the world, because there are studio photographers who will photograph, like, they'll do still life, they'll do fruit, or they'll do, objects. But in the particular, genre that I'm in, which is people, I need to be in the world and interact. And I learn from people throughout all those interactions, these stories, like, from, I didn't even know what parkour was until I met you. I was like, what? Oh yeah, I've seen people jumping, and there's a term for that, and it's just like, and then you taught me about what that in of itself, that discipline carries, which is so fascinating. So
I have a friend, his name's Louis. He's been on the podcast. I think he's episode 9. He's an amazing illustrator, and he is really good at portrait illustration. And something that's really interesting about his journey is that, and the conversation that I had with him on the podcast, is he has found that drawing the human face and trying to capture a particular expression has made him more sensitive to facial expressions and just emotional cues and body language. Has photographing people changed your sensitivity to their emotions?
I wonder if this is a chicken or an egg question, because...
Did you start photographing because you are already sensitive to emotions? Yeah.
I think that's in part of it, right? Because I found that there was something interesting, something caught my eye, but in order for me to see that, it was, not just seeing with my physical eyes, but there was likely something that I was feeling inside and seeing inside. So I actually think that's probably what people connect with in terms of the images that I make, is that I am feeling something or I'm seeing something. So I think photography has helped heighten something, but oftentimes when I am photographing, I feel as though something comes over me, and it's not me per se, and that something comes through and get a feeling that I'm supposed to click at that moment. Like, so I think it's a part of a dialogue or more of a conversation of me registering something that's happening energetically, where it's like, okay, I'm hearing, I'm listening while I'm seeing. And so I'm photographing. So it's a hard thing. I mean, it definitely, there's other elements where I would say photography has made me it's made me a much stronger writer, and vice versa. It's made me a much stronger graphic designer. It's made me a much stronger storyteller. But I think that's because any craft or any discipline will provide a foundation that can translate into multiple disciplines. I think that's what a good craft will do, you know, if you're really sticking with it. Yeah. Like parkour, I'm sure. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's like that, how it is for me in yoga. I mean, it goes off the mat, right?
So you just mentioned something that's really interesting to me. I've talked to a lot of painters in particular who feel like while they are in the flow of creating, that there's something kind of like coming through them, whether it be their subconscious mind or some kind of greater transcendental cosmic creative force that is coming through them and just using their body as a conduit. There's many philosophies on this phenomenon, but some painters feel like they're not the one creating, you know, they're just kind of along for the ride, and the artist is just a piece of art's way of making another piece of art, so to speak. And you mentioned that when you're holding a camera, you just have a feeling of pressing the button at that moment. And I guess my question is, do you ever feel like you need to get your ego out of the way and just kind of let this creative force flow through you without your judgmental decision-making mind muddling anything up?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's what the practice is, essentially. I think that's what any kind of art or craft or any kind of discipline will do, is it requires a certain level of mental acuity to step away from the clutter. So I'm also, you know, I do that with yoga. I do that. I used to be a long distance runner too. And so I would, you know, the more and more I had in my head, besides just left, right, left, right, left, right, or my breathing, it would slow me down in running. And it's the same.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
case in point what you just said about one art, like being able to extrapolate the things you learn from one art onto other art.
Oh yeah. And that was because I started running after singing. So breath was really important to that.
Wow.
All of it's interlinked in terms of what every single discipline and what we learn and what we take from it. But what the point was of all that is every discipline shares something and provides an insight that we can learn, and which is why I will go off on kind of a side tangent, which is why I think it's so important that we all practice something that makes us feel alive, so we can experience that, and that we can come back to that repeatedly to practice that. How do we let go of the ego, and how can we come back? For some people like me, I mean, I do sit every day. I'll sit and I do traditional Vipassana meditation, and I'll sit even if it's 10 minutes and just practice that coming back. For some, it's not necessarily sitting on a cushion, but it is doing vocalises. For me, it was like if I wanted to really get into singing and I had to get into flow state, which is the exact same thing as meditating. It was really being in my body and connecting and being hyper acutely attuned to what am I doing. It's the same thing with photographing. It's the same thing when I'm on the mat in yoga. Where are my bandhas, right? And like, where's my drishti? It's the same thing when I am having this conversation with you and being fully present. And it's not that I think artists are particularly special and above and beyond, like, say any other forms of channeling and expression. It's just that it requires it in order for pure creation. It demands it. Art demands that we are completely present in order for any kind of expression. And I think that's what makes it different than any other form of study. So you asked me in an email, like,
how does everyone having a high-powered camera in their pocket change? How could that change the collective consciousness? Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah, all of your questions were so great, and I was just like, okay, I could go to so many directions, but I think the point of that one and where I wanted to go is it's a practice. Are we practicing the process? And great art comes from practicing process. And it's not because we're solely focused on the end state, but because we're in the moment and the moment of creation. So what makes art different from, say, and in your question is not necessarily about art versus not art, but I think you're talking about this democratization of access to creating something and using a particular medium, correct?
Yeah.
So it depends on what the intention is of using the medium. So it doesn't matter to me whether or not I'm using a lead pencil or I'm using a keyboard, right? If I'm writing a novel, it's still a novel. Is one better than the other? Same thing with a camera. Does it really matter if I'm using a cell phone or if I'm using a medium format, heavy, beautiful camera? It doesn't really matter. It's more so what's the intention and what's my process in it. And regardless of whether I decide to publish it or not, and what publication I decide to publish, it doesn't really matter. More so is like, what am I celebrating while I'm creating it? What am I learning from that?
Yeah.
And so it becomes less for me of a dialogue of yes, great. If I get likes, great. However, did I enjoy the process, and was it also a process for me to upload it and to share something, to write something about this photograph that I did and to share it and have a conversation? Is that part of my intention? And to ask those questions more so than, okay, is a selfie okay? Like, is that considered photography? Like, by God, yeah, I actually had this girl in one of my in a workshop that I took on street documentary photography, and her project was she wanted to actually photograph people doing selfies, and that was her thing. She wanted to understand the cultural premise
Photograph
of it.
people of taking selfies.
Exactly. Yeah. And we were in Times Square, and she was doing that a lot because there's just so much of it,
selfies
right?
Going on. That's Selfie Central.
Exactly. And I mean, just in general, I mean, it's like you can find that everywhere. And I'm not embarrassed to say I have a selfie stick in my bag, but that's more so because I find moments where I'm like, oh yeah, I should do a live here.
Yeah. You have a very balanced, healthy, and grounded perspective on taking pictures. I think that there are a lot of people who will use the camera on their phone to take pictures with the intention of just simply publishing it on social media. And of course, some of our biggest social media platforms, Instagram, prime example, it's based off photography. It's a photograph app. And I guess I'm a little bit more critical of social media, where I know that these technologies, these platforms are being created to manipulate human behavior in such a way that drives engagement with the platform. And I think that you can use social media, but also social media can use you. And I think that one of the ways it uses you is to take a picture of the food you're eating, take a picture of where you're at, and tag it, drop your location, and all these things that help these tech giants make more money. How do you use social media in a healthy way? How do you use social media without social media using you? How do you use social media without, like, these cell phones that we have in our pocket?
Yeah.
They're like slot machines. They're constantly trying to manipulate our behavior by giving us a dopamine hit when we get a lot of likes on a picture. So we're more incentivized to take pictures of things that other people like, maybe other than what we feel we want to publish. Like, how do you balance satisfying your audience and satisfying yourself when these social media platforms are based off of you satisfying your audience?
Exactly. So it's interesting because you are now aware of how the game works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Once you know how the game works, then there's another level in which you can step back, right? That's like the observer, right? So you know how what the tendencies of the game is, or what I'll use those other terms, what the ego likes to do, and you know what its triggers are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But then you come in, you're
Higher self.
I don't even like to use the term higher self, actually. It bothers
it's not
me.
Above.
It's not.
Above,
No. But you get into, you tap into another place that you're in observation mode. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's the observation state in which I start to use social media and say, okay, this is how people are communicating right now. Okay, if people are here communicating, how can I be part of the conversation instead of separating myself? Because going into separation isn't in itself also a tactic that doesn't work, because there is no separation. Mm-hmm. Okay, so not to go esoteric on this, but
Please do.
No, but I'm saying on a very, very simple level is that, what is the whole purpose? What is the reasoning behind any of us producing art? It's for self-expression, correct? And it's an expression of beauty in general in life, of humanity, of existence. No, it's a way to communicate. Who are we communicating to? And how can we communicate? And how can we communicate in a way that is efficient? And how can we communicate in a way that gets out to people? Well,
and in a way that is true to ourselves.
Exactly. Well, this day and age, we have multiple options. We can still do how we used to do in, back in the day, which was, we can go and knock on doors, and we can go to, various galleries and say, hey, look at my portfolio. That's one way. Or what we can do is we can go to 7 billion people with a click of a button. Actually, sorry, it's only 1 billion people on Facebook.
Really? Only 1 billion?
Only 1 billion.
Yeah.
And Instagram. So we can go to 1 billion people at a click of a button. I don't know about you, but if that doesn't cost me any money to actually produce a whole entire portfolio, but I have the capacity to click a button and I can do that constantly, which way am I going to go? Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to choose a route where I could potentially be meeting Susie in Down Under in Australia, which has happened to me.
Through social media.
Exactly.
Making connections.
Yes, making connections. And I can be invited to somewhere across the entire world because I clicked one button.
Yeah.
Does that make it any right? Does it make it any better? Does it make it any worse? No, it is. I understand how the game works. I understand what my options are, and that's what I'm choosing. I'm choosing to engage in such a way that I have potential to communicate, otherwise where I might not be able to do if I were going door to door. And And that's okay with me.
Yeah.
I will say this though, I'm not gonna close my eyes to the fact that there's something gross to me about the way photography is, and the way that photography
It's being hijacked.
not
really.
even no, well, I don't not hijacked, but I think that there's, to me, photography is poetry. It is the most, and I like to say it's kind of like a haiku. You have to be very succinct. You only get one frame to say something, right? It's like even more efficient than a haiku, because God, it's like, if you had to equate it to an audio thing, it's literally it's like one syllable, right? And an haiku, you get 575 or whatever. So it's really it is poetry. And if I were to read Rumi, I'm gonna take my time. I'm gonna read it probably multiple times, because I usually don't get Rumi the first time. Same thing with Shakespeare or a Pablo Neruda poem. So when I'm flipping with my thumb super, super fast with something, with photography, and I'm not saying, with photography isn't the only thing that's on Instagram, by the way. So, but when I'm specifically talking to like photography on there, it's hard, because that's a medium that requires some genuine sitting. That is the beauty of it, and that gets lost in this hyper fast way of consuming, and it's consumption essentially. And art isn't necessarily meant to be consumed like a Pepsi Coke.
Of course, and when people are scrolling on Instagram, I think average amount of attention that someone will spend on a given post is 3 seconds. So people are incentivized to make some piece of content that will grab attention immediately. That's why you see so many like clickbaity titles for like articles or something like that, and you click on it and the article has like no substance at all. It was just using that little technique to capture your attention in those quick few seconds that they have it. How do you think the attention economy is affecting photography? Have you seen people take pictures for the purpose of simply getting an immediate reaction from people? How do you see that dynamic of social media affecting photography?
Wherever there is a desire for any kind of recognition, there's going to be sensationalism.
Yeah.
And that's just going to happen in any medium. I don't think it's any different now with photography being so much in the limelight. I think the biggest peril is that it becomes more of a proving, and that's what any artist has peer pressure oftentimes. Whether it's a traditional like painter who needs to go to a gallerist and say, hey, like, do you think you can sell this work for me? No, it needs to be a bit more, because your clients who are high net worth individuals, they want this more. Or actually, because according to the Christie's market, if this is going to do much better at Sotheby's. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's always going to be a need, this push and pull between approval for what the market demands, and also for just genuine expression.
Yeah, and that's the line that artists walk on, because you can be an artist in a vacuum, but I feel like you need to share your art. Then no matter what it is, you need to share it. That's part of being an artist. And because that is a variable in being an artist, you deal with this conflict of being potentially motivated to create content out of some kind of idea of what your audience wants, and that can fog up your own kind of true intention for your art. That's the balance beam that we're all walking on, and I guess you do that just by staying true to yourself while also kind of being outside of this whole game and seeing how the things that you can do, the art, by seeing what kind of value your art can add to people's lives and add that to their life in such a way where value comes back to you. That seems like the most honest way of doing it, not to put something out because you're seeking approval or immediate gratification, doing something that's just expedient. It's about finding the most meaningful and truthful way of sharing your art, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's some advice that you have for budding artists trying to be just that, an artist? Like, how do you think that budding artists should use social media? How do you think they should promote themselves? What's just some advice you have?
First and foremost, show up and share. That's just the key rule to any success, and I mean success in terms of just fulfilling your own definition of success is show up, be present to the invitations, and show up to your own work. Come to the desk, come to the table. If you're come to the studio, show up every single day, like whether it's 5 minutes or not, but show up. Show up to your clients, show up to your emails, in so many respects, and then share. We are not here as artists for ourselves. If anybody thinks that you want to live an artist life, and you think that it is for yourself, you are in the wrong business. I'm sorry, it's not for the ego. It's not.
There's an aspect of it that can be, but there's no way that you can only be an artist for yourself.
Exactly. I mean, then that's and I'm using, because I know art is a very broad term, but what I'm saying is, like, in terms of becoming, an artist who wants to practice this as a sustainable way of living. Just, I guess if you want to be an artist and you want to make moolah off of it, like, it's a wrong headspace to be thinking that this is just about you, because it's not. None of our lives are just about us. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm here because I'm in a community. I'm part of something greater. And the moment I think that I'm in isolation, I've lost. So it's about sharing the work, sharing it one-on-one, share it with, the person next to you, share it with, people one click of a button, 1 billion people. Share it with people in passing. Share it in the ways that you can teach. Like, it doesn't have to be literally, hey, look at my art. But it can be like, oh, actually, it's interesting. This is what I've learned. Or share it by, like, offering to give a tutorial, what have you. It's just in so many different ways that we can share. And so I would say, to your other point, is how to use social media is, don't do it for the likes. Do it as part of the practice of sharing, and do it as part of the practice of showing up, because oftentimes we're scared. It's really difficult to be an artist because we're constantly being vulnerable. But the practice of showing up, and potentially getting someone to say, oh yeah, that was so rad, but also the potential to get somebody saying, oh, that's so dumb. That potential, opening yourself up for any kind of feedback, is part of the process and the practice of showing up. So I say, if it's a very low economic, like, you don't have to pay any money to practice that showing up when you're on social media. So why not practice there? And instead of making it the meaning of your life or meaning or identity of who you are as an artist, play with it. That's ultimately what I've been doing is I really have just been playing on there more so than anything. And then also taking it as a way of showing up as I'm so engaged in what I'm doing that I'm willing to put myself out there. And I'm showing up to all these people because it matters. It matters enough to do that. It's such a low barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I do it?
Yeah.
So I come from this mentality, and I say that any artist who's using the cop out that it's me being a sellout. It's only you're only being a sellout when you let it, when you compromise yourself. And I mentioned this on one of my talks that I did. I said, look, we have to all mind our own business. And that literally means paying attention to setting the terms of how we want to work as artists, how we want to represent ourselves, where we want to represent ourselves, and how much we want to get paid. Setting all these terms, that's our business. And if we want to stick our head underneath the sand and say, oh, wait, but that's just more the business stuff, or that's not really my area. No, it is, because at the end of the day, that's what helps us either add or take away from our creative output. And if we don't have control over our own creative output, whether it's either helping to elevate, give us more energy to create, or take away, then we're giving that control away. And we can't blame anybody else, but hold ourselves accountable to that. So I'd say first and foremost, get out there, just show up and share, and then start setting terms. Get the feedback, realize what sucks, what works, what doesn't, and from there, set your own terms.
Thank you, Genevieve, so much for doing this. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Tell us more about some projects you're working on right now, where people can find you, anything you want to kind of add on to the tail end of this.
Yes, I am. So you can find me on Instagram at Triangle Flash. Yes, it's like the triangle and flash like as in a flashlight. So Triangle Flash on Instagram, and I am also doing some talks on Anchor, also under Triangle Flash. And a bigger, larger project that I'm doing that I've been taking baby steps towards is by 2028, I will be I'd like to have essentially a media company that is based primarily on storytelling. So it's a platform that is inspired by social media. It was inspired by social media because I have been very much saddened by the way social media has done a lot of attention grabbing and a lot of privacy issues, but just to have a neutral platform that allows people to share. And I'm building that right now. You got an email. That's kind of like the baby steps of it. I don't know how to describe it other than, you guys, please just follow Triangle Flash. And I'm going to be announcing, I can't articulate any more so than that. It's a media company essentially that tells stories without these likes and clicks. It's just storytelling for storytelling's sake.
For now, the vision is incubating.
Yeah, actually, I can't say too much because it's in the process of getting funding, etc.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Yeah, but it's coming.
Well, once again, Genevieve, thank you so much for doing this. You're such an awesome person, and thanks for stopping by and lifting the iceberg.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks again for listening to the Lifting the Iceberg podcast. You can stay up to date on any new podcast by following Lifting the Iceberg on Instagram and Facebook, or by going to liftingtheiceberg.com. You can check out Genevieve's work at genevievekim.com, but definitely check out her Instagram page at Triangle Flash to check out more of her photography as well as photos from her ICU project. Thank you to Alexa Spaddy for designing the graphics for this podcast. You can check out Alexa at alexaspaddy.com. And thank you to Kerusu for the soundtrack Stay With Me. You can find Kerusu on YouTube, Spotify, and Soundcloud.